The radar screen flickered with an anomaly that shouldn't exist. Deep within NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain complex, Senior Airman Rodriguez leaned closer to his console, his coffee growing cold as he studied the impossible signature. A single aircraft, moving at subsonic speed, had somehow penetrated the most sophisticated air defense network on Earth without triggering a single alarm. No transponder, no flight plan, no heat signature that matched anything in their database. "Sir, you need to see this," Rodriguez called to his supervisor, his voice carrying an edge that cut through the low hum of the operations center. The aircraft was maintaining a steady course toward restricted airspace, flying with the casual confidence of someone who either didn't know where they were or didn't care. Colonel Marcus Vance crossed the dimly lit room, his polished boots clicking against the concrete floor. 23 years of military service had taught him to recognize when something was fundamentally wrong, and every instinct was now screaming. The unknown aircraft appeared to be a civilian plane, possibly a vintage trainer, but its flight path traced a perfect line through corridors that existed only in classified documents. "Scramble 2 Raptors from Elmendorf," Vance ordered, his jaw tightening. "Full intercept protocol." Within minutes, the thunder of twin Pratt and Whitney engines echoed across the Alaskan wilderness as 2 F-22 Raptors lifted into the crystalline morning sky. Major Jake "Hawk" Harrison led the formation, his wingman Lieutenant Riley "Ghost" Morrison maintaining perfect position 3 miles to starboard. Both pilots were elite, hand-picked from the top 1% of fighter pilots, their aircraft representing the pinnacle of American air superiority technology. The mysterious plane continued its unhurried flight, seemingly oblivious to the approaching interceptors. Through their helmet-mounted displays, the Raptor pilots could see their target clearly now, a weathered North American T-6 Texan, its silver skin dulled by decades of service. It should have been in a museum, not threading through some of the most sensitive airspace in North America. "Unidentified aircraft, this is Hawk 1, Harrison transmitted on the emergency frequency, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "You are in violation of restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately and alter course to bearing 090. Silence. The old trainer continued its steady path, the morning sun glinting off its canopy. In the rear cockpit, a figure sat motionless, hands steady on the controls. The pilots couldn't make out details, but something about the aircraft's handling suggested experience, the kind that came from thousands of hours in the air, not weekend flying lessons. "Hawk 1, this is NORAD Control," Colonel Vance's voice crackled through their headsets. "Target is now 30 seconds from entering Alpha 7 restricted zone. You are authorized to escalate to warning shots if necessary." Major Harrison's finger moved closer to his weapons systems, but something made him hesitate. The way the T-6 flew, the subtle corrections in its flight path, whoever was at the controls knew exactly what they were doing. The morning air was crystal clear over the Alaska Range, the kind of pristine visibility that made flying feel like touching the edge of eternity. Major Harrison adjusted his position, bringing the F-22 alongside the vintage trainer in a standard intercept formation. Through the canopy of the T-6, he could now see the pilot more clearly. A woman, her graying hair visible beneath a worn leather helmet that looked like it belonged to another era. She wore no uniform that Harrison could identify, just a simple brown leather jacket over what appeared to be civilian clothes. Her hands moved with the unconscious grace of someone who had been born to fly, making minute adjustments to her controls with an economy of motion that spoke of decades in the cockpit. She hadn't acknowledged his repeated radio calls, but something in her posture suggested she was fully aware of his presence. "Ghost 2, you getting a visual on the pilot?" Harrison asked his wingman. "Affirmative, Hawk. Appears to be a civilian female, approximately 60 years of age. She's flying that antique like she owns the sky." Below them, the Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly, a carpet of snow-covered peaks and valleys that had witnessed countless military exercises and training flights. But this was different. The woman in the T-6 was flying with a purpose that went beyond mere navigation, following waypoints that existed in no civilian chart. Unidentified aircraft, Harrison tried again, his voice carrying more urgency now. You are approaching highly restricted military airspace. This is your final warning. Identify yourself and alter course immediately, or I will be forced to take defensive action. For a moment, the only sound in Harrison's headset was the steady whisper of his oxygen system and the distant rumble of his engines. Then, through the static, came a voice that changed everything. The transmission was clear, unhurried, carrying the kind of authority that couldn't be faked or learned from books. It was the voice of someone who had seen combat, who had made life-and-death decisions when the stakes were measured in nations rather than individuals. Hawk 1, this is Valkyrie 7, the woman said, her call sign delivered with quiet precision. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The words hit Harrison like a physical blow. Every pilot in the Air Force knew that call sign, though most believed it was legend rather than fact. Valkyrie 7 belonged to Captain Alina Val Kozlovna, a name spoken in hushed tones in ready rooms and officer clubs, a pilot whose exploits had been classified so deeply that they existed more as myth than military history. NORAD Control, did you copy that transmission? Harrison's voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. We copy Hawk 1. Stand by for authentication. In the depths of Cheyenne Mountain, Colonel Vance was already reaching for a secure phone, his fingers moving through a sequence of numbers that would connect him to archives that officially didn't exist. The name Valkyrie 7 was pulling up files marked with classification levels that required presidential clearance to access. The T-6 continued its steady flight, seemingly indifferent to the drama unfolding around it. But Harrison noticed something he had missed before. The aircraft bore no civilian registration numbers. Instead, barely visible beneath decades of weather and wear, was a faded military star, the kind that hadn't been used since before he was born. Deep in the classified archives of the Pentagon, automated systems were cross-referencing the call sign Valkyrie 7 against databases that hadn't been accessed in decades. The results that emerged painted a picture of a woman who had officially never existed, whose missions had been so sensitive that even their existence was compartmentalized beyond normal classification protocols. Captain Alina Kozlovna had been recruited into a program that existed in the spaces between other programs, flying missions that couldn't be acknowledged by any government. Test pilot, combat veteran, and intelligence operative, she had disappeared from official records in 1987 after a mission that had literally rewritten the balance of power in the Cold War. The files showed a pilot of extraordinary skill, someone who had mastered aircraft that ranged from experimental fighters to civilian planes pressed into intelligence service. But more than her technical abilities, the reports consistently noted her strategic thinking, her ability to see patterns and possibilities that escaped others. She hadn't just been a pilot, she had been a weapon in human form. Hawk 1, NORAD Control, Colonel Vance's voice carried a new tension. We're showing authentication protocols from 1987. How is that possible? Harrison looked across at the T-6, where the woman, Kozlovna, if the call sign was legitimate, continued her unhurried flight. Her aircraft was now less than 10 miles from airspace so sensitive that its very existence was classified. But instead of panic or desperation, her flying displayed a calm confidence that suggested she knew exactly what lay ahead. Valkyrie 7, Harrison transmitted, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there before. Ma'am, you're approaching restricted airspace that I cannot allow you to enter. I need you to explain your intentions. The response came without hesitation, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Hawk 1, I'm not approaching restricted airspace. I'm coming home." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Harrison thought he understood about military protocol and national security. But as he studied the flight path of the T-6, cross-referencing it against classified charts in his aircraft's navigation system, a disturbing possibility began to emerge. The woman wasn't following civilian waypoints or even standard military routes. She was navigating using coordinates that existed only in the most classified operational plans, flying with a precision that suggested intimate knowledge of defenses and procedures that were supposed to be known to only a handful of people. "NORAD Control, I need immediate clarification on Valkyrie 7's authorization status," Harrison transmitted, his professional calm beginning to show cracks. "Working on it, Hawk 1, stand by." But Alina Kozlovna wasn't waiting for bureaucracy to catch up with reality. Her T-6 began a gentle descent, heading toward coordinates that didn't appear on any map that Harrison could access. The tension in NORAD's command center was palpable as Colonel Vance worked the phones, trying to unravel a mystery that seemed to deepen with each passing minute. The authentication codes transmitted by Valkyrie 7 were legitimate, but they belonged to operations that had been sealed under presidential directive. More troubling still, the codes were current, not historical artifacts, but active authorizations that suggested Alina Kozlovna had never actually retired from whatever shadowy organization had originally recruited her. "Sir," Senior Airman Rodriguez called from his console, "I'm tracking additional aircraft inbound to the intercept area. Looks like a C-130, flying with full military transponder codes." Vance felt the situation spiraling beyond his control. A mystery pilot flying through restricted airspace was challenging enough, but now additional military aircraft were converging on the area without his knowledge or authorization. Someone with access to codes and clearances that exceeded his own was orchestrating events, and he was beginning to suspect that intercepting Valkyrie 7 had never been the point. They had been maneuvered into this situation for reasons he couldn't yet comprehend. Above the Alaskan wilderness, Major Harrison watched as Alina Kozlovna's T-6 approached what his charts showed as empty airspace. But his instruments were detecting something his eyes couldn't see: heat signatures and electromagnetic anomalies that suggested a substantial installation hidden beneath the snow and rock of the mountains below. "Valkyrie 7, he transmitted, "I'm reading multiple ground installations in your flight path. Are you aware of their presence?" Alina's voice carried a hint of amusement when she responded. "Hawk 1, I helped design those installations. They're exactly where they should be." The implications of her words hit Harrison like a sledgehammer. If Alina Kozlovna had been involved in the construction of classified facilities that didn't appear in his briefings, then her security clearance and operational knowledge went far beyond what any normal pilot should possess. She wasn't just a rogue civilian in an old airplane. She was someone with intimate knowledge of America's most sensitive military secrets. As if responding to some invisible signal, the snow-covered landscape below began to transform. Camouflaged doors slid open, revealing aircraft hangar entrances that had been invisible moments before. Heat signatures bloomed as underground facilities powered up systems that had been dormant, and Harrison realized he was witnessing the activation of a base that officially didn't exist. "Ghost 2, are you seeing this?" Harrison asked his wingman, his voice tight with disbelief. "Affirmative, Hawk. It's like watching a mountain come alive." Alina's T-6 was descending toward a runway that materialized from what had appeared to be natural terrain, its surface emerging from beneath retractable panels that had perfectly mimicked the surrounding landscape. The engineering required for such concealment was staggering, representing billions of dollars and decades of construction that had somehow escaped public knowledge. The C-130 that Rodriguez had detected was now visible in the distance, approaching the same hidden facility with the confidence of an aircraft returning to its home base. As it drew closer, Harrison could make out the subdued markings of a unit he didn't recognize, codes that suggested operational authority at the highest levels of military command. "NORAD control," Harrison transmitted, his voice carefully controlled. "I need immediate clarification on the facility Valkyrie 7 is approaching. It's not showing in any of my briefing materials." "Hawk 1, we're not showing any facilities in that area on our charts either." But Alina Kozlovna was already on final approach to the hidden runway, her T-6 dropping through the clear morning air with the precision of a pilot who had made this landing countless times before. Harrison found himself following protocol that seemed increasingly meaningless as he watched a scenario unfold that challenged everything he thought he knew about military operations and national security. The landing was flawless, Alina's T-6 touching down on the concealed runway with barely a whisper of tire smoke. Ground crews emerged from hidden positions, their movements coordinated and professional as they guided the vintage trainer toward a hangar that hadn't existed on Harrison's reconnaissance imagery from the previous week. "Hawk 1, NORAD control," Colonel Vance's voice carried a new tone of uncertainty. "We're receiving stand-down orders from STRATCOM. You are to maintain overwatch but take no further action against Valkyrie 7. Harrison felt the frustration of a professional soldier caught in a situation that defied standard operating procedures. "Sir, I need clarification. What is our current mission status?" "Your mission is to observe and report, Major, nothing more." As Alina taxied her aircraft toward the hidden hangar, Harrison caught a glimpse of other aircraft in the underground facility, shapes that suggested technology years ahead of anything in standard military service. He was witnessing the existence of a black program so deeply classified that it operated beyond the knowledge of conventional military command structures. The T-6 disappeared into the mountain as the camouflaged doors began closing, but not before Alina Kozlovna had transmitted one final message that would haunt Harrison for years to come. "Hawk 1, thank you for the escort. Give my regards to the new generation. They're in good hands." The doors sealed with mechanical precision, returning the landscape to its innocent appearance of natural wilderness. But Harrison knew that what he had witnessed represented only the tip of an iceberg whose full scope was beyond his clearance level to understand. Within the hidden facility, Alina Kozlovna shut down her T-6's engine for what she knew would be the last time. The vintage trainer had served her well through decades of missions that existed only in the memories of those who had planned them, but her active flying days were finally ending. She had returned not just to a base, but to a legacy that would outlive her by generations. The hangar was filled with aircraft that represented the cutting edge of aerospace technology, projects that wouldn't see public acknowledgement for decades, if ever. Engineers and technicians moved among them with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that their work directly impacted national survival. These were the inheritors of programs that Alina had helped establish, the next generation of pilots and designers who would carry forward missions too sensitive for conventional military channels. General Patricia Storm Hawkins approached Alina's aircraft as the canopy opened, her 4 stars carrying the authority of someone who commanded resources that didn't appear in Pentagon budgets. The two women embraced with the familiarity of professionals who had shared dangers that couldn't be discussed even in classified briefings. "Welcome home, Val," Hawkins said, her voice carrying both warmth and relief. "We weren't sure you'd make it." Alina climbed down from the T-6's cockpit, her movements still graceful despite the years. "The young pilots up there are good, Storm, better than we were at their age. They had good teachers, even if they don't know it yet." The truth was more complex than either woman could openly acknowledge. Alina's final mission hadn't been a homecoming so much as a transfer of responsibility, a symbolic passing of authority from one generation to the next. The F-22 pilots who had intercepted her represented the visible face of American air power, But the real work of national defense happened in facilities like this one, where dedicated professionals operated beyond public recognition or official acknowledgement. As Alina walked deeper into the facility, she passed walls lined with photographs and citations from operations that officially never happened. Pilots, engineers, and intelligence officers who had risked everything for missions that couldn't be celebrated in public, whose contributions to national security would remain classified long after their deaths. It was a hall of fame for heroes who could never be heroes, patriots whose service existed in the shadows between truth and necessity. "The new facility in Nevada is ready," Hawkins said as they walked. "We can have you there by tomorrow if you're ready to take command." Alina paused before a particular photograph, herself as a young captain, standing beside an aircraft whose shape was still classified decades later. She had been so certain of her purpose then, so confident that the risks she took were justified by the threats they faced. Time had proven her right, but the cost had been measured in relationships never formed, experiences never shared, and a life lived always at the edges of normal human existence. "I'm ready," she said finally, "but I want to make sure the integration protocols are in place. The next generation needs to understand not just how to fly these missions, but why they matter." Major Harrison and Lieutenant Morrison maintained their patrol orbit over the area where the hidden facility had revealed itself, their instruments now showing only natural terrain. The snow had already begun covering the tire tracks left by Alina's landing, and within hours, no evidence would remain that aircraft had ever operated from the mountainous wilderness below. "Hawk 1, you are cleared to return to base," came the transmission from NORAD Control. "File your report as Code Black classified." Harrison acknowledged the order, but his mind was still processing the implications of what he had witnessed. Code Black classification meant the events would be sealed at presidential level, accessible only to a handful of individuals whose clearances exceeded his own. He would be debriefed by intelligence officers who would remind him that discussing the incident, even with other military personnel, constituted a federal crime. But as he banked his F-22 toward home, Harrison found himself thinking not about the security implications, but about Alina Kozlovna herself. The woman who had flown through restricted airspace with the casual confidence of someone returning from a grocery run had challenged everything he thought he understood about military aviation and national defense. Her final message, about giving regards to the new generation, suggested a connection between her world and his that he was only beginning to comprehend. The flight back to Elmendorf was conducted in radio silence, both pilots lost in thoughts about what they had experienced. They had been trained to intercept enemy aircraft, to protect American airspace from foreign threats, but they had never been prepared for the possibility that the most dangerous flights might be conducted by Americans, whose missions exceeded their own clearance levels to understand. As they approached their home base, Harrison made a decision that would shape the rest of his career. Instead of simply filing the required report and forgetting the incident, he would begin the process of applying for higher security clearances, seeking assignment to units that operated beyond conventional military structures. Alina Kozlovna had shown him that there were levels of service that transcended normal career progression, responsibilities that required sacrifice of a kind he was only beginning to appreciate. "Ghost 2, he transmitted to his wingman, "when we get back, I want to discuss some career options with you." "Copy that, Hawk. I've been thinking the same thing." Below them, Alaska's wilderness kept its secrets, but the two F-22 pilots had been forever changed by their encounter with a woman who represented the hidden history of American military aviation. They had witnessed the existence of a world that operated parallel to their own, where patriots served in anonymity and heroes remained unknown to preserve the security of a nation that could never fully acknowledge their contributions. In the depths of the hidden facility, Alina Kozlovna stood before a map that showed threats and opportunities invisible to civilian intelligence services. Red pins marked locations where hostile forces were developing technologies that could shift the balance of power, while blue pins indicated assets and operations designed to maintain American superiority in conflicts that hadn't yet begun. The young officers around her represented the next generation of pilots who would fly missions into airspace that didn't officially exist, carrying out operations that would never be acknowledged by the government they served. They would sacrifice normal lives for the kind of service that measured success not in medals or promotions, but in threats neutralized before they could manifest. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alina said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to command through decades of successful impossible missions, "welcome to the real war. It's been going on for 50 years, and it will continue long after we're gone. Your job is to make sure we keep winning it." The briefing room fell silent as she activated displays showing aircraft and weapons systems that wouldn't be publicly acknowledged for decades. These were the tools they would use, the technologies that represented America's ultimate advantage in a world where victory was measured not in territory conquered, but in disasters prevented. Outside, the Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly under a sky that held no trace of the drama that had unfolded there. But deep beneath the snow and rock, the real guardians of American freedom were preparing for missions that would never make headlines, flying aircraft that would never appear in air shows, and taking risks that would never be celebrated in public. Alina's journey from mystery pilot to mission commander was complete, but her story was just one chapter in a larger narrative of service that extended back to the earliest days of military aviation and forward into a future where the stakes grew higher with each passing year. She had shown Major Harrison and Lieutenant Morrison a glimpse of that world, and in doing so, had ensured that the next generation would be ready to carry forward the mission when her time finally came to an end. The sky above Alaska returned to its pristine emptiness, but the work of defending America continued in the shadows, carried out by men and women whose names would never be known, whose contributions would never be celebrated, and whose courage would ensure that freedom survived another day. Years later, Major Harrison, now Colonel Harrison, would find himself briefing young pilots on the importance of operational security and the existence of missions that transcended normal military understanding. He would never mention Alina Kozlovna by name, but he would speak of the dedication required to serve at levels where personal sacrifice became a form of patriotism that demanded everything and promised nothing in return. The legend of Valkyrie 7 would live on in the whispered stories of pilots who understood that the most important battles were fought by people whose victories could never be acknowledged, whose defeats would never be mourned, and whose service represented the highest form of devotion to a country that could never fully recognize their contributions. Alina Kozlovna had returned home, but home was not a place. It was a mission that would outlive them all, carried forward by new generations of pilots who would inherit the responsibility of protecting America from threats that existed beyond public knowledge. The simple woman who had been intercepted by F-22s had revealed herself to be anything but simple, and in doing so, had demonstrated that the real guardians of freedom were often those who remained invisible, whose stories were never told, and whose legacy was measured not in recognition, but in the survival of the values they had sworn to protect. The morning sun climbed higher over Alaska, illuminating a landscape that held its secrets well, while deep beneath the mountains, the work of defending America continued as it always had, in the shadows, in silence, and in the hands of heroes who would never be known.